Randy, we have a country to manage.
Right.
And you have livelihoods to protect. We have the capital market that we've developed over the years, which is basically collapsing, to resurrect. We have a financial sector that has come under strain considerably over a period that needs to be protected. So there are quite a lot of stakeholder interests that need to be managed. But we are here because after we ran this country into the ditch, the government, despite all the hesitations, ended up with the IMF. And when you go to the IMF, there are processes that the IMF has to follow in order to agree a program with you. One of those processes is that they will send a team to your country. And the team will work with the authorities to assess the state of the economy and to agree a raft of measures that have to take place in order for a program to be successful to restore the economy. Part of that is that then a memorandum of understanding is issued, or if you wish, an expression of intent is expressed by the IMF team that comes into this country, providing some conditions precedent that have to be met in order that the staff can approach the IMF board to approve a program. That is normally called the staff level agreement. But the staff level agreement also comes with an aid memoir, which is a confidential assessment in very frank language to the government, as opposed to the diplomatic language you find in their official publications to the public. In doing that, one of the guiding principles of the staff team is to ensure that the country is compliant with a major internal policy of the IMF. That internal policy of the IMF is that the IMF does not lend into an unsustainable situation. So some work has to be done to determine whether we are compliant or non-compliant with this internal policy of the IMF, which is that we have to be debt sustainable. So there's always a joint team of the country or the authority in question, the World Bank and the IMF, that undertake a debt sustainability analysis of your country in order to clear the first hurdle. And Randy, it is important that people understand why this debt sustainability is important. If you run a company, and Japan has a bank.
Use yourself as an example.
Okay.
Please.
And Ken Ofurata has a bank.
I thought you were going to say amen. The man is prophesying your life.
This man.
You know, he tried one with PDS and so.
because you are my friend.
I know.
You let it pass
on this particular allegation.
You let it pass. Because your friend, you let it pass.
Because it's my friend, I'll let it pass.
I want you not to say it again.
Because you know what you are saying is not true, but it's fine.
So, Randy, a businessman runs a company and he's engulfed in a lot of debts. That business, let's take it to be corporate Ghana. And in a particular year, that businessman needs to cough up 31 billion Ghana cedis to pay interest alone to people he has borrowed from. Let's call them bondholders. He also has to pay another 21 billion in interest to people outside he went to beg for loans. Let's call them Eurobond holders. Then on top of that, he has to amortize 22 billion of the principal that he's borrowed from these Eurobond holders, culminating in 74 billion Ghana cedis. Randy, that person approaches this bank, Data Bank, and says, I want you to give me $3 billion to help me solve my problems. You do the analysis and you realize that with this deep hole of 72 billion that you have. If I gave you $3 billion, which is the equivalent of about 30 billion, how sure am I that this 30 billion will not end up going to fill this hole? And in the end, what we have agreed you should do with the money to turn around and improve the company so you can pay me back my 30 billion is realized. So the man says, I'm afraid that if I gave you $3 billion and I have seen this humongous hole that you are sitting on, my $3 billion will get lost in that hole. And all the things that we have agreed you need to do in order to improve the company and stand a chance of repaying me and having a good company will not be realized because the money will be lost in this deep hole and we'll be back to the same problem. So please, go back and talk to your creditors to agree some negotiations and a restructuring that allows you some room and flexibility so that you will be able to deal with them with your internal resources and create the opportunity for my money to go where we are going to agree the money will go. Then I know I would have achieved the program objective. That is where we are. The IMF says, if I give you 3 billion, given your debt situation and the hole you are sitting on, my money will get lost in that hole. So we don't lend into a country with a deep hole. That is to say, we don't lend to an unsustainable situation. So now come back and engage your creditors. And that is clearly communicated to you. You come and say, okay, me, I want to engage my creditors. I'll just write a letter and throw it out and say, from today or from a particular date, I've given you up to this date. Bring the bond that you bought from me for 2 million Ghana cedis. That I have to pay you interest of 19% every year. Bring it. And in place of that, I'll give you a new bond of 100,000 for the 2 million. But you have to do that voluntarily so that I can tear the 2 million, it doesn't exist. The 2 million now becomes a debt of 100,000. The interest rate of 19% doesn't exist. It is now 0 for this year, 0 for another year, some 5% some other year. Then Randy, me, I'm keeping this 2 million. That is what every quarter, every 6 months, they pay me part and I live on. Then I will voluntarily just take this document. If this is not Juju that will send me to go and deliver that 2 million to Kenoforiata and collect 100,000 from Kenoforiata without interest, tell me what will make anybody in his right senses do it. Tell me who will do this in his right senses. So you can keep postponing and postponing and postponing, but as long as it is voluntary, some may even be willing to just tear it off themselves. Because no reasonable man will do that. And you keep saying that it is voluntary. But worst of all, they are blackmailing these investors with fear-mongering.
How?
Gabi says that your bonds may potentially be worth nothing if you don't exchange. And then 2, if you go to court, you won't win. Because if the court gives judgment, Ghana is like a man of straw. He cannot pay. And we don't take a man of straw to court. Is that what our sovereign is now? That Ghana is now a sovereign of straw who you don't take to court because he doesn't have kobo to give you. Is that how to approach this? So Randy, the investors know that under circumstances like that, and like any bank when it is doing restructuring of even a private company's debt, knows that I am at risk of losing my money, if I don't find a way to help this man to generate the cash flow to pay me. But in doing so, I must lose something in order to support this man to be able to help me get my money back. So the investors know that in order to help this country of straw, something must give in order that they can recover their monies over time. That is a basic principle that every investor knows. The banks know that. It is better to work with government to arrive at a solution that preserves their business, that helps government to pay, and that helps the economy to stabilize. They know that. The Eurobond holders know that. But Randy, there are international standards for addressing these matters. And those standards have been used in other countries successfully. But we say, no, we are doing our own with arrogance, we won't engage anybody. Randy, I'll help you with this document produced by the Ghana Association of Bankers, which is the perspective of debt instrument restructuring in Jamaica. A very successful example of an IMF-driven debt restructuring in Jamaica. Mm-hmm. There is another one, which is the Barbadian example of how they restructured their debts and the kind of structures they put in place to ensure seamless 100% acceptance of the debt exchange program. So we're simply saying government needs to listen in order that we can engage in the processes that will lead to a result for all of us. Randy, there is the Institute of International Finance Protocol and Framework called the Principles of Stable Capital Flows and Fair Debt Restructuring. It was instituted in 2004 by emerging market country debtors like Ghana, together with all their official and private creditors who operate within the space of the capital market, and sponsored and supported by the G20, which provided a framework that can assist countries and their creditors in times like this. So it's not as if we are groping in the dark. And Randy, the principle of stable capital flows and fair debt restructuring is not a process that puts a gun to anybody's head in the process. It simply means that, one, you must engage. Even before you wrote the letter, you should have engaged. You should have communicated to individual bondholders to come together and form a representative group to engage you. International bondholders, they on their own form a committee to represent them. The banks will have a representation through the Association of Bankers. Pension funds would have an association and a representative to engage you. They say you have to be transparent and share information. So you must share all information with your creditors, take information from your creditors, because Randy, why that is important is that the investors must know that you have done some analysis to understand the implication of the proposal you are making to them. That you yourself, when you did the proposal, you had done some technical analysis that can show what values are being lost and how those values that are being lost will assist address the problem. You just don't throw out a proposal. But also, there is always the requirement for a conversation around feasible economic adjustments. So already, the investors will say, okay, we agree. But just like when you go to the bank for restructuring, they say this cost is not necessary. Remove it. You have been drinking coffee every morning in the office. Remove it. You have been paying for fuel for even your wife who doesn't work here and all that. Remove it. We call it feasible economic adjustments. Now, that feasible economic adjustment requires that the invested get involved and interested in how you run the government. Because henceforth, you are going to deny them their money, and you are probably going to use their money to run the government. They don't want you to use their money to fund a national cathedral. That is a feasible economic adjustment. They don't want you to have 17 communication people at the presidency. That is feasible economic adjustment. They don't want you who owe me and you cannot pay still be drinking whiskey costing $56,000 after dinner. If you continue that way, how are you going to pay me? If you save that over 1 month, you can actually make payment of 1.5 million to me. So you need to address that. But Randy, at the bottom of all of this is that even if we agree the new terms, there is no guarantee that you can pay. Just as when you were coming to borrow, you were singing very sweet songs about how you were managing the economy and how you could pay. It is the same way if we don't get involved and see how you are going to pay the ones you have agreed you will pay. We are right there and you will now be, scratching your head again. So we need to help you to live the kind of life that can generate the resources and manage the economy, so that even when we agree on some haircuts, the rest of the hair will be available. And that you will not come back to this same conversation. Randy, how is this principle of stable capital flow and fair debt restructuring difficult? And it is very current because just April last year, this principle was amended in the light of the experiences across the globe.
Are we applying these principles?
We are not.
No, just hold on.
Yeah.
Are we applying these principles to the external bondholders?
It is a principle for debt restructuring.
No, what I'm asking is that the focus has been on domestic and their crimes. So, because I know that we also have a process for the external people.
Exactly.
I know there are consultants and others involved. What I want to find out is whether, when it comes to the external part, we're going about these processes.
So the release that was sent out to government by the committee formed by the external bondholders clearly indicated that they endorse the use of the the Institute of International Finance principles of stable capital flow and fair debt restructuring. That is what they.
So from your finding, is that what is happening?
At the moment, the whole place is so silent, but I need to find out.
Okay.
But they made that very clear that they want that endorsed, and they have endorsed that, and they want that to be the framework that would inform the engagement between them and government. Now, technically, what it means is that they have been drawn technically into the design of the IMF program, because they have to insist that these feasible economic adjustments have taken place, and that we are not going to be using their money to fly private jets and all of that. So that is the principle that governs these processes. It's been used in several countries I've cited. There is nowhere you just write a letter to somebody you owe and arrogantly say, look, this is what I will do. If you want, engage me. Now they try to engage you. Randy, if you read the analysis that has been done on the banking sector by the Ghana Association of Bankers, it's dire. And they actually indicate.
Did you hear you were in the last parliament, right?
Yes, I was.
So in the last parliament was your colleague.
Yeah,
he was the
Asibewa.
Yes.
Yeah.
You heard what he said about some banks might even fold up.
Yeah, as we speak now, the analysis showed that the second proposal is even worse than the first proposal to the banks. And I will explain why. The second proposal, the impact of the second proposal, is that if you follow that, about 19 banks may go down, will have, capital adequacy of about 10% or less. The international standard by Basel II and Basel III puts the minimum at 13. What it will mean is that 19 of our banks will struggle to deal with their correspondent banks abroad.
Is that not where the fund that government says is going to set up comes from?
That is not capital. That is liquidity support, which is loans.
Like what the
But
central
here,
bank does.
the capital adequacy is about risk-adjusted capital.
Right.
So you still have to adjust even that liquidity because it's a risk asset.
Right.
So it will mean that 19 of our banks will fail to meet international standards and will struggle in terms of credit appraisal for their correspondent banks to establish credit lines for them to do LCs and the rest. That is the implication. No matter the level of regulatory forbearance, that will be the case. Nine of the banks will move into negative territory.
9.
Yes. That is how bad it is.
And these are from the Association of Banks.
Yeah. That's how bad it is. So they are saying that, look, we have proposed a model of structuring this arrangement. Instead of saying we won't pay any interest, zero, and so we will not accrue any revenue for 1 year, which amounts to about 15 billion of revenue that will be lost. That will wipe out our capital. Why don't we do a weighted average effective rates or effective coupon so that we apply it across the life of the bond? So at least every year you get something trickling in to manage the banks. If you do that, you will still wipe off a greater part of the 72 billion or 74 billion you have budgeted for. So that still gives you room. Of course, you can defer the capital. So the 22 billion amortization would not even happen. And there's no way you would have a restructuring where any investor would want you to pay in the first year part of the principal. No. That can be deferred and spread over a period. And you are not listening. And these are businessmen. You want them to collapse their businesses because somebody says so in government. That is the implication of the proposal.
The kinds of statements
I am saying that if they accept this proposal,
look, they are
that
the
is the
ones who are
implication.
spreading fear mongering.
Am I the association of bankers? Am I the association?
No, wait.
These are official letters written to the government.
But of course, look.
So what are you saying?
And let him finish.
Let me say, look, the one who is bringing the fear mongering, you are not blaming him. The one who is now stating the implications of what he is doing is the one spreading fear mongering.
I'm talking to you, not the Ghana Association of
And I'm saying that I'm re-echoing what their position is.
But you say nobody is listening. That is what the point that I'm making.
If they are listening,
you are the one who is spreading the fear mongering. Because it is not the case that nobody is listening.
Randy, the last letter
That's
they
not
wrote
true.
to the ministry, the last letter they wrote to the ministry was dated 10th January. Before they made the state, they released the state pay state. How many days that? That's almost a week. They are not hearing from them.
That's not true.
Show me their response.
Because they were in the EMT meeting on Friday.
Why don't you let me finish?
Just last Friday. And I was there.
Can I finish my point? Can I finish my point?
So look.
Can I finish my
You
point?
make your point.
Are they at EMT meeting every day?
False statement.
Are they?
But that was the last time they
what
did
is
the
false
EMT
about
meeting.
letters?
On Friday.
These are official positions.
So you cannot say
So
that.
why is it that?
Because that's not
Why
true.
is it that? Listen. Why is it that the association is now saying? They are not even saying don't sign up. They say stop any engagement again with them. That's how angry they are now. Stop any engagement, and that if any particular bank wants to engage government, they must come for clearance. That should tell you how they feel badly treated. And you are saying this falsehood. The arrogance is too much. Individual bondholders, you said you are not going to include them. Suddenly you brought them in. What analysis have you done to think that you should bring them in?
Is it not because they excuse the pensions?
So who should pay? You rob Peter to pay Paul?
No, once the pensions are out, the envelope becomes smaller.
Yeah, but that doesn't.
And there's a criteria that must be met.
So the criteria is that you give others preferential treatment and put the burden on others. That's not how you do it. That's why you engage broadly and see what is the most feasible thing to do. And it's not as if these guys are not providing proposals. Randy, one of the concerns, a key concern of the banks, which is leading to erosion of value, is that there are standards that the banks have to work with, the international financial reporting standards. And ordinarily, they report such traded securities in conformity with IFRS 9, which says always mark those securities that are traded to the market. So if I invested in government bonds of say 80 billion, and at the time a bond was 100 Ghana, I would have reported 80 billion representing the full value of 100 Ghana. Today, if the bonds are now going for 50 Ghana, I have to report 40 billion because I have to report what I can get if I were to go to the market today. And if the market is now saying the bonds are now trading at 50 cedis, it means I can't recover all the 100 cedis per bond. And so I get 50% of my investment in the banking sector, which is about 40 billion. Who suffers that loss? You write it off. But if you are holding to maturity, you will still get the 100 Ghana on maturity. Or if you are holding the bonds as marketable instrument, there is a likelihood that there will be a rally in value again, and you can restate the value. But now, with the announcement of this procedure, those bonds are no longer available in the market. So they don't have a value in the market. If they don't have a value in the market, then you refer to IFRS 13, which says you must now do a valuation of the bond based on the net cash flows, the present values of your net cash flows. And once you spread it, and there are zero values for certain years and insignificant values for subsequent years, if you use a discounting factor that is wide from the factor, the interest rate they are paying you, you will end up in negative positions. And they're asking you, what should be the treatment of credit loss under the current arrangement in order that you don't wipe out our banks? Is that difficult to ask? Is that difficult to ask? The Institute of Chartered Accountants has issued a framework, and they are asking you to engage them in order to agree a position that can assist them in reporting, so that they don't suffer massive credit losses on their books. You are not responding. And yet, they are preparing their accounts for end of year. Now, they are concluding the year 2022. And if they apply the full effect of the international standards, they will lose in excess of 85 billion on their books. This is scary. So I don't see why a government will not be listening to people who are, to all intents and purposes, willing to engage and willing to find a solution. To the extent that they now get angry and write these things to their members. What does that do to the confidence? So Randy, we are not the people. If you started in November, they asked you to do these things, you refuse. Now you've extended to 31st. Are we not back there? And in the end, if you continue this voluntary thing that you are talking about, you will extend again. Because nobody will walk from his house with his bonds in his back to go and substitute for inferior bonds. No one will.